Hello folks. Today I'm going to dive back into ultra budget territory and I'm going to look at watches, two watches actually, two differing but very similar iterations of homages to the Cartier Tank. Now the reason I'm able to look at two of these because these are ultra budget. These are so cheap it's almost unbelievable they can be made. Anyway, the Cartier Tank is one of the oldest wristwatch designs in the world. The design itself is over 100 years old. And these two watches by Sanda and Pablo Raez make a very good job of looking just exactly like one. But whereas a Cartier Tank must, which would be the same size I think as the Sanda one I have here, is £2,500, these watches each come in at less than €20. I mean, I just don't understand how something can be made this cheaply, and it makes me question the price that we pay for other things. Now both these watches have a quartz movement, and the other way that they save money is they have a plated alloy case. Now normally that's a no-no for me, but at this price point I think I'm going to let them off with it. The watches have mineral crystals, dubious water resistance I would say. They don't make any actual depth claim, but they are dress watches with leather straps, and you wouldn't expect to go swimming with watches like that at any sort of price point. But I would hazard that you wouldn't anyway. So without much further ado, let's have a look at the watches and see what you think. Well, here is the Sanda watch, and the Sanda watch is considerably smaller than the Pablo Raez, and the Sanda watch is almost exactly the same size as a medium Cartier Tank must, which is obviously the intention. Now Sanda market this as a ladies watch, and because it's an unusual shape, it doesn't wear as small as it looks. So I think that this is a unisex watch basically, and certainly the Cartier Tank is sold as a unisex watch. It's up to yourselves what you think. Here are a couple of shots of it on wrist, just I'll show you what it looks like. Now, this watch has a buffalo print genuine leather strap, and it's much softer and much more leather-like than the strap on the Pablo Raez. The finishing on the hands there, if you see, catch the light, the bluing on the hands is, in my opinion, nicer than on the Pablo Raez. And the winder detail is a little bit more elaborate, but you still have the blue cabochon. Now cabochon is just the way a stone is finished. It's not a type of stone. So that blue stone there, basically it's a smooth finish rather than a faceted finish or a gemstone. I very much doubt that that's a gemstone. I think that this one and the Pablo Raez both have plastic cabochons. But it is pretty, it looks the part, and so long as it doesn't fall out, it does the job. On the other side of the watch, we can see a nice sort of laser etched Sanda logo, and it says it's water resistant, but it doesn't say to what depth, and I think I would assume it's not really water resistant at all. I wouldn't even try washing the dishes with this. Rectangular watches in general, where the case backs don't screw into the case and where you have a square aperture for the crystal, tend to be harder to make water resistant, so they generally don't bother. Now the dial is not white, the dial is actually silver, and the markers, the Roman numerals, and you see the watchmakers, the clockmakers 4 there, and just as most Roman numeral dials that you see, it's just printed
but it's quite nice quality printing. You can see it sort of stands proud a little. And all in all, the dial and the build quality of the watch is far better than you've got any right to expect for the tiny price that you pay for this. The strap is soft and supple and actually smells leatherish. So I think the genuine leather here does actually involve a cow or possibly a sheep at some stage of its development. The watch has a very unusual bracelet design. A deployant clasp, and it took me a little bit to figure out how to work it, but the cushioning on the watch strap comes to about here, and then this is just a thin piece of leather, and you see how this is bent over. What one does is threads it up there and then back through there. Oops. And then operates as a standard deployant clasp. It's an unusual arrangement, but it's quite comfortable and it works quite well. I don't know what that's supposed to look like because the Cartier Tanks do not have a clasp like this. They actually have a sort of far more standard clasp, like the Pablo Raez one does. Anyway, there's not a lot to be said about these watches. They don't have the vulgarity of a seconds hand. So, this is a dress watch, which you can't really tell is only a quartz dress watch. It's actually quite thick case, considering that it's a quartz watch. They could have made this considerably slimmer, but it's a nice solid design. And I've got to say, the only fault I can find with this is the fact that that case isn't stainless steel. That's alloy. On the back it says there's a stainless steel case back, which is always code for the case isn't stainless steel. So with the Sanda here, like the Pablo Raez, the only cheap element of it is the genuine leather, which may or may not be leather, and the chromed alloy case. Now, in days gone by, you could spend quite a lot of money in a British jeweller's shop and buy a watch with a chromed case, but generally it's chromed brass, whereas budget watches tend to use a zinc alloy, which is a whole lot less pleasant. It doesn't have the same weight, and zinc is a bit more reactive. So what will eventually happen is that your sweat will eat away at the plating, probably there where it touches your skin or on the case back. Even if you wipe the watch down when you take it off, sooner or later you will have pitting occurs in the plating on the watch. But in the meantime, I've got to say, it's a rather nice, solidly made watch, and the finish is highly reflective, and if it wasn't just plated alloy, you would say this polished a very high standard. Picks up fingerprints like nobody's business though. But there you are, there's the Sanda. The only adornment on the dial, apart from the Art Deco minute track and the Roman numerals on the outside, is Sanda logo. Again, just applied, just printed on the dial. The dimensions of the Sanda watch are, well, funnily enough, its width is almost the same as the lug to lug of the Pablo Raez, in that it's 33 point something millimeters lug to lug, 27 point something across the case, and 7.3 millimeter depth, which is actually the same as the Pablo Raez. So this one seems a bit chunkier than the larger Pablo Raez because it's the same thickness, but with much smaller dimensions. The lug width, however, is a far more friendly 20mm. So it's easy to replace the strap on this with something that would be more to your taste. But this buffalo printed genuine leather strap is actually quite nice. Although I would tell you that if I can open it up, the underside of it here is just plastic, which, although it's nice and soft and supple, won't breathe at all, and it sort of cheapens the whole effect somewhat. Now this watch here is the Pablo Raez version. Now it's marketed by them as their gents version, and it has a very, very wide lug width. Now the dimensions of the watch are 33mm across, 40mm lug to lug, and 24mm lug width. So you need quite a wide strap to replace the one supplied. Now what I would say here is that the genuine leather strap here probably, well, it could probably qualify as vegan. It doesn't smell of leather, and although it looks quite nice, I have my doubts as to the actual leather content of this strap. But it doesn't look too bad, and despite the fact it was very stiff out the box, it has conformed quite well to my wrist, and it's not uncomfortable to wear after you've worn it a couple of times. But with the strange flat case back and the fact that the lugs are straight across, there is no tape, they don't taper down towards your wrist at all. It does wear unlike most watches and will feel a bit strange combined with this stiff leather strap. Now the Pablo Raez has a date function which is not particularly well lined up. There's the date window there. The hands are blue, but I don't think that they're blued as in heat treated steel. I think that they are just plated with something. It's not unattractive, they are quite nice. It is just a printed dial, a white printed dial, although the colour in most lights comes off as slightly cream coloured, slightly off white in most lights. There is a cabochon on the wider there, which I think is probably plastic, probably clear plastic, and a laser etched design on the case, quoting that it has a stainless steel case back and water resistance with no depth claim. Looking at the watches here, you can see the dramatic size difference between them. Now the Sanda is marketed as a woman's wristwatch. The Pablo Raez comes in his and hers versions, which are, to all intents and the hers version is to all intents and purposes the same size as the Sanda. Of the two, I think that the Sanda is very slightly better made. It's just a nicer watch. But most of you might find the smaller size quite challenging. My wrist is 7 point something millimeters, and I feel that the watch is just a touch too small for me. Whereas the Pablo Raez wears quite well, but I find that strap width at 24 millimeters a little bit too much for me. I think that's, funnily enough, although the dimensions of the watch are quite modest compared to a sports watch, a diver's watch or whatever, the Pablo Raez, because of the square slab-like nature, actually wears quite a lot larger than the dimensions would suggest. It's actually, on the wrist, it's actually quite a chunky watch. Both of them, however, are quite pleasant and comfortable to wear, with the caveat that the Pablo Raez, the strap had to break in an awful lot more. The Sanda was comfortable straight out the box, the Pablo Raez less so. Now the Pablo Raez watches also come in rose gold with a brown strap, and that might be a preference for some of you out there.
Well folks, what did you think of those? I think that the value for money proposition here is spectacular. And I also think that the low pricing probably puts some of you off buying these watches, because you look at them and think, well, they must be crap. Now, beside from cutting corners on materials, I mean plated alloy cases, mineral glass, and well, quartz movements, but you sort of expect that anyway at this very, very cheap price. You might be forgiven for thinking that, well, they're a bit rubbish, but they aren't rubbish. These are both nice, solid little watches that are very pleasant. And apart from my fear about the longevity of the plating on the alloy, if that stays intact, these watches would do you for ages. Very nice, but it's up to you. You have to decide. Bye for now.